Hey everyone, Rho here. Well, today we kick off our Roboute Guilliman week. The week where we're going to try and dive into the makeup of this important character. The decisions he's made, the moments he's experienced, how it's all shaped the Primarch we see before us in the current 40k timeline. And well, we really need to begin by revisiting the one decision that still defines him today. The one that looks sure to come back to haunt him. The formation of Imperium Secundus. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. So you have been warned. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, as long ago as it may feel now, going into the Horus Heresy series, Roboute Guilliman's fate was largely left to be written. The original history, as far as we knew, was a much more simple one. Guilliman was stuck out on the far galactic east, and by the time he reached Terra, it was just too late. Horus had been defeated, but at a terrible cost. And while that overall narrative would largely remain the same as we went into the Heresy series, we have obviously seen a huge amount of development on the reasons why Guilliman would arrive late. And this is where we have seen rise to the Imperium Secundus storyline. Now, back when I first read The Unremembered Empire several years ago, the novel in which this revelation first comes to our eyes, I'll be honest, I didn't really see this as the big deal it would go on to be. However, as I've continued to grow on my lore journey over the years, I can and do tend to reflect on it a bit differently. And today I really wanted to dive into Guilliman's rationale and motivations in making this decision. Was it simply the Primarch acting in the ways he was designed to do? Or was there a more personal, emotional motivation behind it? Because the truth is, Guilliman's mind is made up long before his brother L. Johnson arrives. Well, the first real piece of insight into Guilliman's way of thinking is also perhaps the most insightful in regards to his founding of Secundus as well, at least for my mind. And it takes place really very early on within the novel The Unremembered Empire by Dan Abnett. We see Guilliman reflecting on a personal memory of his adopted father Connor, the man who found and raised him upon Macragge. And so Guilliman was lucky enough to not only be well schooled and trained in all manner of topics as he grew, but he was able to see firsthand the realities of command, the skills required to not only lead the everyday people, but to govern them. For all his genetically blessed gifts, for my mind it's fair to say Guilliman benefited greatly from this upbringing beneath his stepfather. And it really raises that nature versus nurture debate. It's one of these learnt lessons from Connor that really struck a chord with me in regards to his future with Secundus. Contingency. Guilliman reflects how his stepfather believed that every plan, no matter how innovative, how intricate, how complete, always needed a backup, a contingency plan in place. And this is exactly what his Imperium Secundus would go on to be. This, for my mind, is the very premise of Imperium Secundus. It's Guilliman's contingency. Now, this might be quite obvious, but it highlights why Guilliman would become so set and fixated on such a big move. This may well be Guilliman being Guilliman, as Malcador would go on to say, but it highlights his rationale behind it. It highlights that it's not simply the 13th Primarch doing what he was made to do, but how his upbringing by Connor Guilliman had shaped him. Now Guilliman goes on to think that the Emperor, his true genetic father, would undoubtedly agree with this premise as well, and it tells us exactly Guilliman believes his blood father would agree, and he turns his thought onto the possible fall of the Imperium. If it were to fail, would the Emperor despair, or would he simply turn to his next plan? And look, there's no fault in Guilliman's logic here. Whether the lesson natured from Connor or inherited from the Emperor, I think we can all see the value in having a plan B. A plan to fall back on should the worst come to the worst. And whether coincidence, fate, or some other unknown power, it's not long after this that Warsmith Dantiok, a loyal Iron Warrior working with Guilliman, manages to get the Pharos beacon functional. Now the Pharos, for those of you who may not be aware, is essentially a piece of ancient Necron technology, and it works similar to the Astronomicon in piercing the warp, except that it's a single beacon. Unknown to Guilliman and Dantiok at this point, it was actually part of an ancient Necron network of beacons all over the entire galaxy. But regardless, it was here that Guilliman makes the pivotal decision for Dantiok to focus the beacon's light on Macragge, lighting the capital of the 500 worlds throughout the entire warp. Now what Guilliman was honestly expecting by making this decision, only he knows, but whatever they may have been, I can genuinely say wholeheartedly that he was clearly not prepared for the truth. In their thousands they came, battered remnants and scarred survivors from across the war-torn Imperium, lost and adrift in the dark without the Emperor's light to guide them. There was no glorious army or triumphant news coming to Macragge, only the cold hard truth of the loss of 3 of his brothers, the decimation of 3 loyal legions upon Istvan. If Guilliman sought answers by lighting Macragge throughout the stars, he did not like the answers it brought him. Fallen brothers, more betrayals, Prospero destroyed, Sanguinius missing, the Lion departed. He even contemplates the thought that Russ is left trying to fend them all off himself, that he's probably been torn to shreds, and that Rogel could be burning along with the throne world. Guilliman truly wonders if he is now the last loyal son left. And it's then as he stands within his private chambers, reacting to all this tragedy, he truly commits to his actions to come. Whether subconsciously or knowingly already walking down this path, whether in his mind by lighting Macragge as a beacon, he had already made that decision within some part of his mind. It's as he reels from all this incoming news and tragedy that Guilliman truly decides the Imperium must begin anew. And it's really quite telling some of the words Guilliman chooses to affirm it vocally. For the sake of mankind, as my father would have wished it. As my father would have wished it. The obvious assumption is he's talking about the Emperor here. The sake of mankind comment certainly leans you in that direction. However, as we said earlier, it's really the lesson of his adopted father Connor that is the bedrock of Guilliman's motivations and decision. Guilliman instead has simply used his own reasoning to apply it to the master of mankind. Guilliman believes the Emperor would agree. He believes it. He does not know it. The problem with belief in this kind of context is that it's absolutely guided and founded by our own opinion. Sure, knowledge and memory play a huge role, but can we really say emotion wouldn't too? If Guilliman is indeed referring to the master of mankind here, it is very telling that he's referring to him in a past tense. As my father would have wished it. It's clear Guilliman was already seeing the value in a contingency plan, and now as the scope of the situation hits him like a ton of bricks, realizing his worst fears, now he sees the need. He hasn't formalized anything publicly yet, but it's undoubted his course is now set. Everything from this point forward has turned from terror and is now focused on Macragge. Is it possible Guilliman's allowing his emotion to convince him of this decision, that in his eagerness he's declaring his father would agree, without truly knowing? For me, there's no way we can rule that out, and if anything, it looks like the more logical turn of events. The Emperor is a being of unknowable intellect. Of course he would see the value of a contingency or backup plan, but simply assigning the Imperium Secundus as a contingency does not automatically mean the Emperor would agree with it, especially when it could very easily be argued that in founding the Imperium Secundus, Guilliman was not making his full effort to return to Terra. Now, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today and argue the right or wrongness of his decision. I'll put a poll up and link it in the description for you all to have your vote on whether Imperium Secundus was right or wrong before we revisit and discuss that debate later in the week. So make sure to go place your vote on that after watching this upload, and I'll do a story poll on my Instagram as well for those of you that follow me there. But in keeping with Guilliman's mindset and reasoning, we see further evidence unravel when he meets survivors of his brother's legions who have finally arrived to Macragge. Iron Hands and Raven Guard survivors pledge their service to Ultramar, certain their Primarchs have fallen and their legions broken. However, the arrived Salamanders led by Zytos are not so convinced in their Primarch's fate, and until proven otherwise, they will remain convinced that Vulcan lives. And unbelievably here, Guilliman seemingly tries to talk Zytos out of his hope. And again, it's just another fascinating insight into Guilliman's mindset, as he tells the Salamander that the best argument would be to accept the worst and move on, describing hope as a burden. Now, Guilliman poses it as a question, but the meaning behind it is clear. And you can't help but wonder if this is Guilliman revealing his own thoughts and mind, that he in truth is already accepting of the worst and is moving on. That for all the talk of if Terra still stands, he is in truth writing off the throne world already. It could really feel like he's trying to impose his own viewpoint onto Zytos. It's a very un-Guilliman-like feeling for me. The man who was raised in the virtues of a senate and is usually so open to discourse and debate. Here he's almost against it, and it's reaffirmed again as Guilliman greets the Imperial Fist contingent led by Alexis Pollux. The Imperial Fist's orders are to return to Terra, from Rogel Dawn himself. There's no way they can ignore that. And again from Guilliman, there is no route to Terra. It might not even be there anymore. And Alexis is like, well, that's all the more reason for us trying to get there. But Guilliman is definitive. And he actually states, "I'm telling you, there is no route to terror." Now that's not an open debate question, a comment for an answer. That is stated as fact. And he even countermands the orders from Dawn, recalling the forces to terror. For me, that is far worse than simply founding an Imperium anew. He's actively stopped loyal servants of the Imperium, even attempting to get back to the throne world. For all the hope of Guilliman's Imperium Secundus, for all his need to keep the dream of the Imperium alive, for me, this is the root of all of Guilliman's future guilt. It's not because he had a contingency plan. It's not because he wanted to keep the spark of the Imperium alive. It's because, in truth, he consigned the Imperium and the Emperor to their fate to do so. And that is the root of Guilliman's guilt. Even those 10,000 years later, it's not the mere notion of another Imperium, that in some way he was committing heresy. It's not even the fact he placed another emperor upon its throne. It's the fact that, in his heart, he did betray his father, because he gave up his hope. But as always guys, what do you think? Why do you think Guilliman became so adamant in this moment? Was it a simple commitment to his practicalities of the situation, as Guilliman himself states? Or in truth was it more to do with the emotional toll, that as the news broke and flooded in, Guilliman, as any normal man, began to fear the worst? That even he as a Primarch became guided by his emotions. And so, as he tried to convince Zytos, he simply refused to hope. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. If you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.